The conference room fell silent when Admiral James Keller walked in and found a woman he'd never seen before, disassembling one of the most complex weapon systems in the U.S. military arsenal like she was checking her watch. The M107 Barrett lay in perfect component arrangement across the table: barrel assembly, bolt carrier group, recoil spring, trigger mechanism, each piece positioned with surgical precision. Her hands moved with unconscious expertise, cleaning each part with the kind of attention that spoke of thousands of repetitions. She didn't look up when he entered, didn't acknowledge his rank or the 3 stars on his collar, just continued her work with focused intensity that made everyone else in the room seem like they were moving underwater. "Who the hell are you?" Keller asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded SEAL teams through 3 decades of warfare. That's when she finally looked up, and her eyes told him everything he needed to know before she ever spoke a word. This wasn't some armorer or weapons technician. This was an operator, and the story of how she'd made a shot that rewrote the physics textbooks was about to change everything he thought he understood about long-range interdiction. Before we show you exactly what happened that made a 3-star admiral stop everything and demand to know who this woman was, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because what you're about to witness isn't just a story about an impossible shot. It's about the moment the Navy's most senior SEAL officer discovered that the future of precision warfare had been hiding in plain sight. Now, let's get into it. The Joint Special Operations Command headquarters in North Carolina hummed with the controlled chaos of military planning. Officers moved through corridors with purpose, carrying classified folders and speaking in the careful language of people who dealt in secrets. Admiral James Keller had seen it all, from the jungles of Vietnam as a young lieutenant to the mountains of Afghanistan as a task force commander. At 58, with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who'd earned every promotion through fire, he was preparing for what everyone knew would be his final assignment before retirement. The conference room on the 3rd floor was supposed to be empty. He'd scheduled it for 0600 to review operational reports in peace before the building filled with staff officers and their endless briefings. Instead, he found the door ajar and light spilling into the hallway. His first thought was security breach. His second was to identify the threat. What he found was Petty Officer First Class Daisy Ward, late 20s, athletic build, dark blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it looked painful. She wore standard Navy working uniform with no distinguishing patches or indicators of specialized training. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything other than another administrative specialist or intelligence analyst, except for the M107 Barrett .50 caliber anti-materiel rifle spread across the conference table in a display that would have made any weapons instructor weep with joy. Keller had been around Barrett rifles his entire career. He knew the weapon system intimately, had authorized their use in dozens of operations, had watched master snipers work with them in every environment from Arctic conditions to desert heat. The M107 was 32 pounds of precision engineering capable of hitting targets at ranges that seemed impossible. It was also notoriously complex, with a recoil system and barrel assembly that required expert knowledge to properly maintain. Ward was field stripping it with the casual efficiency of someone who could do it blindfolded. Her hands moved in smooth sequence. Bolt disassembly, barrel removal, trigger group separation, each movement economical and precise, no wasted motion, no hesitation. The kind of muscle memory that came from repetition, measured in years, not months. "Who the hell are you?" Keller asked. Ward's hands paused for exactly 1 second before continuing their work. She didn't startle, didn't jump, didn't show any of the reactions most junior personnel displayed when a 3-star admiral appeared unexpectedly. "Petty Officer Ward, sir. Intelligence Specialist attached to Naval Special Warfare Development Group." Her voice was calm, professional, with a slight southern accent that suggested Texas or Oklahoma roots. "I apologize for the unauthorized use of the conference room. I needed a clean space for weapons maintenance and thought—" "That's an M107, Keller interrupted, gesturing at the disassembled rifle. "Intelligence specialists don't typically carry 50 caliber sniper systems." "No, sir, they don't." Ward set down the cleaning rod she'd been using on the barrel assembly and straightened to something resembling attention. This is personal equipment. I maintain it on my own time. Personal equipment? Keller's tone made it clear he didn't believe that for a second. You're telling me you privately own a .50 caliber anti-materiel rifle that costs more than most cars and you just happen to be cleaning it in a JSOC conference room at 0:30? Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm telling you. The audacity of it almost made Keller smile. Almost. He moved closer to the table, studying the weapon components with the practiced eye of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. The barrel showed wear patterns consistent with high round count. The bolt face had been modified with aftermarket parts that improved reliability. The scope, a Schmidt & Bender 5 to 25 x 56, was worth more than the rifle itself. This wasn't a collector's piece. This was a working tool that had seen extensive operational use. "Where'd you learn to strip a Barrett?" Keller asked, his tone shifting from interrogation to genuine curiosity. "YouTube, sir." Ward's expression remained perfectly neutral. "Lots of tutorial videos. Bullshit." "Yes, sir, complete bullshit." Now she did smile, just slightly. "But I thought I'd try the easy lie first before we got into the complicated truth." Keller found himself liking her despite the irregularity of the situation. There was something refreshing about someone who didn't immediately grovel or make excuses when caught in an awkward position. "Start talking, petty officer, and this time, try the truth." Ward glanced at the conference room door, then back at the Admiral. "Sir, with respect, the truth is classified at a level that requires—" "I have every clearance that exists in the U.S. military," Keller cut her off. "Try again." She considered this for a moment, weighing options with visible calculation. Then she made a decision that would change both their careers. "Marine Scout Sniper School, 2019. Top of my class. Deployed to Syria with a force recon unit for 18 months. Transitioned to a JSOC task force that doesn't appear on organizational charts, specialized in long-range interdiction of high-value targets in denied areas." She paused. "And I was very, very good at it." Keller studied her with renewed intensity. If what she was saying was true, it raised about 100 new questions. Why the transfer to intelligence work? "Because I made a shot that shouldn't have been possible, and it scared people who make decisions about operational capabilities." Ward's voice carried no pride, no boasting, just fact. "After that, they decided I was better suited for analysis than field work." "What kind of shot?" "The kind we should probably discuss behind a closed door with a CF rating, sir." Keller was already moving toward the door, closing it with a solid click. He activated the electronic lock and pulled the security shade across the window. When he turned back, Ward had resumed reassembling the M107 with the same fluid precision she'd used to disassemble it. "Talk," he said simply. Ward's hands continued working as she spoke, the mechanical task seeming to help her organize thoughts about events that clearly still carried weight. October 2023, Syrian-Turkish border region. We had intelligence on a high-value target, a coordinator who was facilitating weapons transfers to multiple extremist groups. He was operating out of a compound in the mountains, terrain that made conventional assault extremely risky. Keller listened without interruption, watching her fingers work the rifle's components back into their proper configuration. The problem was access. The compound sat on top of a ridge with clear sight lines in every direction. Any approach would be detected hours before we could get close enough for a takedown airstrike was politically unfeasible due to civilian presence in nearby villages. It needed to be surgical, precise, and unattributable. "Long-range interdiction," Keller said, already seeing where this was going. "Yes, sir. Command authorized a sniper operation. My spotter and I inserted 72 hours before the shot window, moving through hostile territory to establish a hide position." She locked the barrel assembly into place with a precise twist. "We found a position on a facing ridge, surveyed the compound, confirmed target identity, and then we did the math." "What was the range?" Ward's hands paused for just a moment. 2,847 meters, 1.76 miles. Keller felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd been around snipers his entire career. He knew what the records were, knew what was considered possible under ideal conditions. The longest confirmed kill shot in history was just over 3,000 meters, made by a Canadian Special Forces sniper in perfect conditions with multiple practice rounds. "That's beyond effective range for the M107, he said carefully. "Yes, sir, it is, by about 800 meters. Ward finished reassembling the rifle, the weapon now whole again, looking deadly and purposeful under the fluorescent lights. But I didn't have another option. The shot window was 6 hours. After that, the target was relocating to an unknown location. It was then or never. "Tell me about the shot." Ward took a breath, and Keller saw something flash across her face. Not fear, exactly. More like respect for the magnitude of what she was describing. Wind was the primary problem. At that range and elevation, I was dealing with multiple wind layers moving at different speeds and directions. Valley winds at ground level, mountain winds at mid-elevation, high-altitude flows above that. Each layer had to be calculated separately. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, flipped it open to a page covered in numbers and diagrams. The calculations looked like advanced physics mixed with meteorology. Temperature was dropping as the sun set, affecting air density. Humidity was fluctuating. Barometric pressure was in transition, and I was shooting across a valley that created its own weather patterns. She traced a diagram showing elevation profiles and wind vectors. The bullet would spend approximately 7 seconds in flight. In that time, it would arc to a maximum height of nearly 200 feet above the target, pass through at least 5 distinct atmospheric layers, and drop almost 400 feet from bore line to impact. Keller had authorized thousands of sniper operations. He understood the mathematics of ballistics, the complexity of long-range shooting. What Ward was describing wasn't just difficult, it was nearly impossible. "How many practice shots did you take?" "None." Ward closed the notebook. "At that range, every shot would have given away our position. It was one shot, one opportunity. Either I made it or the mission failed." "Walk me through it." Ward's eyes went distant, seeing something that wasn't in the conference room, remembering a moment that had clearly been carved into her memory with perfect clarity. "I spent 6 hours doing calculations, measuring wind with every tool we had, tracking temperature changes, watching how air moved through the valley by studying dust patterns and vegetation movement, building a complete atmospheric model in my head." She lifted the M107, bringing it to her shoulder in a movement so smooth it looked like the weapon was part of her body. Through the scope, she tracked invisible targets only she could see. My spotter confirmed target identification at 1843 hours. The target emerged from the compound, moved to an open area. I had maybe 90 seconds before he'd move back inside. The light was fading. Wind was transitional. Everything was wrong. But you took the shot anyway. I took the shot because everything being wrong was the only condition I was going to get. Ward lowered the rifle, her expression neutral, but her eyes carrying the weight of that decision. "I calculated for a 47-minute of angle drop. Adjusted for 3.6 miles per hour, wind right to left at target level, 7 miles per hour left to right at mid-elevation, 12 miles per hour right to left at peak altitude. Factored in temperature gradient, Coriolis effect, spin drift, and the fact that I was shooting from higher to lower elevation across a valley that would create updrafts." She paused, and Keller saw her hand tighten slightly on the rifle. "And then I added an adjustment that wasn't in any manual or calculation table, a correction based purely on instinct and experience. Something I felt more than calculated." "How much?" 2 additional minutes of angle left, 1/4 minute up. The kind of adjustment that would make every instructor tell you you're wrong." Ward met his eyes. "But I knew I was right." "What happened?" "I pressed the trigger. The rifle fired. The round left the barrel at 2,700 feet per second. It arced up through cooling evening air, passed through 3 different pressure systems, got pushed and buffered by winds that changed direction twice during its flight time." Ward's voice had dropped to something almost reverent, describing a moment that transcended normal combat operations. 7.23 seconds after I fired, the bullet struck the target center mass. He dropped instantly. Mission success. Confirmed kill at 2,847 meters. The conference room was absolutely silent. Keller had heard a lot of war stories in his career. Most of them were exaggerated, improved with time and retelling. But Ward's description had the ring of absolute truth. The level of detail, the technical precision, the way she talked about it with respect rather than pride. This wasn't embellishment. This was testimony. "Who confirmed the shot?" he asked. "My spotter first. Then post-mission intelligence confirmed target termination. The compound went into chaos. They couldn't figure out where the shot had come from, thought it might have been an airstrike or artillery. The idea that someone could reach out and kill from that distance wasn't even on their threat model." And then what happened? Ward's expression tightened slightly. "Then someone in the intelligence community ran the numbers and decided that what I'd done wasn't possible, that the shot had been luck rather than skill, that repeating it would be impossible, and that I represented an unreliable capability. So they buried you in intelligence work. They promoted me and gave me a medal that's classified and can't be publicly acknowledged. Then they assigned me to analysis so I could contribute my field experience to tactical planning." The bitterness in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. "Which means I spend my days reviewing reports written by people who've never been in combat, making recommendations that get ignored by commanders who don't want to hear from a petty officer." Keller understood the situation immediately. The military was full of people who couldn't handle excellence that exceeded their understanding. Ward had demonstrated capability that made senior officers uncomfortable because it challenged their assumptions about what was possible. Rather than embrace that capability, they'd neutralized it by promotion and reassignment. It was wasteful, stupid, and exactly the kind of bureaucratic nonsense that drove Keller crazy. "Show me," he said suddenly. Ward looked confused. "Sir? Show me you can make that shot again. Prove it wasn't luck." Keller was already moving toward the door. "There's a range facility 30 miles from here, long-distance shooting course that goes out to 2,000 meters. I want to see if you can actually do what you say you did." "Sir, with respect, I don't need to prove anything. My record speaks for—" "I'm not asking you to prove it to me," Keller interrupted. "I'm asking you to prove it to yourself. Because I think you've spent the last year wondering if maybe they were right, if maybe that shot was luck. And I think that's eating you alive." Ward stared at him, and Keller saw he'd hit close to home. She looked down at the M107 in her hands, then back up at the Admiral. "When do you want to go?" she asked quietly. "Right now." The long-range precision shooting facility was built into rolling terrain that allowed for extreme distance shots under controlled conditions. The range stretched from elevated shooting platforms out across valleys and ridges to target areas that had been surveyed with GPS precision. Maximum documented distance was 2,200 meters, impressive by any standard, but still 600 meters short of Ward's claimed shot. Keller had made phone calls during the drive, using the kind of authority that comes with 3 stars to clear the range and assemble the personnel he wanted present. By the time they arrived at 0730, a small crowd had gathered. Master Chief Reynolds, the SEAL community's senior sniper instructor, Captain Martinez from Naval Special Warfare Development Group, 2 range safety officers, and a civilian contractor named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in advanced ballistics. Ward stepped out of the vehicle carrying the M107 case, like it weighed nothing. She'd been quiet during the drive, focused inward in a way that suggested she was already running calculations and preparing mentally for what was coming. "Petty Officer Ward," Keller announced to the assembled personnel, "is going to demonstrate long-range precision shooting at extreme distance. I want full documentation, wind measurement at multiple elevation points, temperature and humidity tracking, ballistic analysis of every round fired. This is not a qualification shoot. This is a technical demonstration of capabilities that may inform future operational planning." Master Chief Reynolds looked skeptical. He'd been teaching snipers for 20 years and had seen every kind of shooter from natural talents to dangerous incompetence. A female petty officer with an intelligence specialty didn't fit his mental model of who showed up to demonstrate extreme range shooting. "What distance are we shooting, Admiral?" Reynolds asked. "Start at 1,500 meters. Work up from there." Keller turned to Ward. "That work for you?" "Yes, sir." Ward was already setting up at the shooting platform, deploying a bipod and checking the rifle's mechanical function with practiced movements. "I'll need wind data from multiple points downrange." Dr. Chen moved forward with portable weather stations and anemometers. "I can set up measurement points at 500-meter intervals. Give us 10 minutes. While Chen's team deployed sensors across the range, Ward settled into position behind the rifle. She wasn't rushing, wasn't showing off, just methodically preparing for the shot the way thousands of hours of training had taught her. Reynolds moved closer, watching her set up with professional interest. "You've done this before," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Few times." Ward adjusted the scope's parallax with tiny, precise movements, not usually with an audience. "Where'd you train?" "Marine Scout Sniper School initially. After that," she paused, glancing at Keller, who nodded permission to continue. "After that, other places. Quiet places that don't advertise." Reynolds understood immediately. JSOC ran training programs that didn't officially exist, developing capabilities that never appeared in public records. If Ward had come through that pipeline, it explained a lot. "Target is set at 1,500 meters, one of the range officers called out. "We have impact sensors active." Ward checked her data card, made adjustments to her scope, then settled into her shooting position. Her breathing slowed visibly. Her body relaxed into perfect stillness. The M107's report was massive even with hearing protection. The recoil drove the weapon back against her shoulder, but Ward's position was so solid the disruption was minimal. Downrange, the impact sensor registered instantly. "Hit! Center mass, 1,500 meters." Reynolds raised his eyebrows slightly. One shot, one hit at that range was good, but not extraordinary for an experienced shooter. 1,800 meters, Keller called out. The target was moved. Ward made adjustments, accounting for the increased distance and slightly different wind conditions. Another shot, another immediate impact confirmation. 2,100 meters. Now they were pushing beyond normal training ranges. The target at that distance was barely visible even through high-power optics. Wind measurement became critical. Dr. Chen's sensors were providing real-time data on atmospheric conditions at multiple points downrange. Ward studied the data on a tablet, cross-referencing it with her own observations. She made adjustments to her scope that seemed almost random to the observers, but clearly followed some internal logic. The shot took longer to set up this time. Ward waited, tracking something only she could see through her scope. Then, in the pause between gusts, she fired 7 seconds later, an eternity in shooting terms. The impact sensor confirmed the hit. Reynolds was no longer skeptical. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "That's the longest documented shot I've ever personally witnessed." "We're not done," Keller said. He looked at Ward. "How far can you actually shoot with this weapon system?" Ward lifted her head from the scope, considering the question seriously. "Under perfect conditions, maybe 2,600 meters before the round goes subsonic and becomes unpredictable under field conditions with variables I can measure and calculate." She paused. 23 to 2,400 meters with reasonable confidence. "What about your serious shot? That was 2847. That was different. I had 6 hours to study the environment, perfect observation of the target area, and," she hesitated, "and I was willing to accept a shot that had maybe a 40% probability of success because the mission required it." Keller understood. Sometimes combat operations demanded taking shots that training would say were impossible. The difference between a good sniper and a great one wasn't just technical skill. It was the judgment to know when the impossible was necessary. "Set up at 2,300 meters, he ordered. "Let's see if you can hit your claimed maximum." The target was deployed at a distance that pushed the range facility to its limits. At 2,300 meters, nearly a mile and a half, the target was a tiny speck even through the powerful spotting scopes the observers were using. Hitting it would require not just skill, but a level of environmental reading that bordered on precognition. Ward spent 15 minutes studying conditions. Wind was the primary variable. At that distance, even a 1 mile/hour miscalculation would cause a miss by several feet. Temperature layers were creating mirage effects that made accurate ranging difficult, and the bullet would spend over 8 seconds in flight, giving the environment plenty of time to affect its trajectory. Dr. Chen was watching her data readouts with fascination. "The atmospheric conditions are terrible for long-range shooting," she said to no one in particular. "Multiple wind layers, temperature inversion at mid-range, humidity gradient that's creating unpredictable air density variations. By the textbook, this shot shouldn't be attempted." "By the textbook, a lot of things I've done shouldn't have been attempted," Ward replied without looking away from her scope. "But textbooks don't account for everything." She made a series of adjustments to her scope that seemed to defy the wind data everyone else was reading. Reynolds watched with growing interest, trying to understand what she was calculating. "You're adjusting the wrong direction," he said finally. "The wind data shows you need to come left. You're going right." "The wind data shows surface conditions," Ward replied calmly. "But at this distance, the bullet spends most of its flight time at elevation, where different wind patterns dominate. I'm calculating for where the round will be during the majority of its flight, not where it is for the first 200 meters. It made sense once she explained it, but it required a level of three-dimensional thinking that most shooters never developed. Ward wasn't just calculating for distance, she was modeling the entire bullet trajectory through layered atmospheric conditions and making corrections for where the round would be most affected. She settled into her final shooting position. The waiting seemed to stretch forever. Then, in a moment that would later be described by observers as almost supernatural, Ward fired. The bullet arced away into the distance, invisible to everyone except through the implications of its passage. Birds in its path scattered, air displaced in its wake. 8.4 seconds later, an impossibly long time to wait for confirmation of a shot, the impact sensor registered hit. The range officer's voice carried genuine awe. "Direct center mass, 2,300 meters. The assembled personnel erupted in excitement. Reynolds was shaking his head in disbelief. Dr. Chen was checking her instruments like they might be malfunctioning. Captain Martinez was already on his phone, presumably reporting to his chain of command that something extraordinary had just happened. Keller approached Ward, who was safing her weapon with the same mechanical precision she applied to everything. "You've proved your point," he said quietly. "Have I?" Ward looked up at him. "Or have I just demonstrated that I can make impossible shots on a range under controlled conditions? The question isn't whether I can do it, Admiral. The question is whether anyone will let me do it when it matters." 3 days later, everything changed. A crisis erupted in the Horn of Africa. Intelligence identified a terrorist leader who'd been orchestrating attacks across 3 countries. He was moving through territory that made conventional operations impossible. Tribal regions where U.S. military presence would trigger political catastrophes. But someone in the intelligence chain remembered Ward's demonstration. And suddenly, the impossible shot wasn't just a technical curiosity, it was a mission requirement. Keller found himself in a planning room with Ward, Reynolds, Martinez, and representatives from multiple agencies. The target was holed up in a compound in mountains that made the Syrian operation look simple by comparison. "Range to target is 2,700 meters from the nearest feasible hide position," Martinez said, highlighting the location on a tactical map. "We've got satellite imagery, thermal scans, and local intelligence confirming target presence. Window of opportunity is 4 hours during a planned meeting with subordinate leaders." 2,700 meters is beyond proven capability, Reynolds interjected. Even Ward's demonstration maxed out at 2,300. "My Syria shot was 2,847, Ward said quietly. "This is actually shorter range." "But the Syria shot was—" Reynolds stopped, choosing his words carefully. "We don't know if that was repeatable." "There's one way to find out." Ward was studying the tactical imagery with focused intensity. "I need elevation profiles of the terrain, complete atmospheric modeling of the area for the target time window, and 60 hours to get in position and study the environment." Keller made the decision that would define the rest of his career. You have authorization to execute. Reynolds, you're the spotter. Martinez, provide whatever support assets she needs. This is priority 1. The insertion was handled by a SEAL team that deposited Ward and Reynolds in hostile territory under cover of darkness. They moved through terrain that had seen conflict for generations, carrying equipment that represented the absolute cutting edge of military technology while infiltrating like ghosts. The hide position was a nightmare. Carved into rock at extreme elevation, offering a clear line of sight to the target compound, but requiring them to operate in temperatures that dropped below freezing at night and climbed above 100 during the day. For 60 hours, Ward studied the environment. She tracked wind patterns by watching smoke from cooking fires, measured temperature changes by observing how heat shimmer moved across the valley, built a mental model of atmospheric conditions that was more accurate than anything computers could calculate. Reynolds, a man who'd trained hundreds of snipers, found himself learning from someone half his age. Ward saw things he'd never noticed, subtle patterns in how air moved through mountain passes, how elevation affected not just wind speed, but wind direction, how the time of day created predictable thermal flows. You don't just calculate the shot, Reynolds said during one of their observation periods. You feel it. Calculation only gets you close, Ward replied, her eyes never leaving her spotting scope. The last 10% is understanding that the environment is alive. It moves, breathes, changes. You can't just plug numbers into a formula and expect it to work at these distances. You have to become part of the system. The target appeared exactly when intelligence predicted. A meeting in an open courtyard, multiple individuals, clear identification required before engagement. Ward had been in position for 6 hours, her body completely still, her mind entirely focused on the shot that was coming. She'd made her calculations adjusted for every variable she could measure. And now, she was waiting for the moment when everything aligned. Reynolds confirmed target identification. Primary target is in the open. We have clear shot opportunity. Wind is, he checked his instruments, reading at 12 miles per hour from the east temperature. I know. Ward's voice was calm, almost meditative. I can feel it. Her adjustments were different from the calculations Reynolds was reading. She was compensating for things that didn't show up on instruments, intuition built from experience, understanding that transcended measurement. The M107 was solid against her shoulder. The target was a tiny figure in her scope, barely distinguishable from the others around him. At 2,700 meters, the slightest error would mean a miss by meters. There was no margin for mistake. Ward's breathing slowed to nothing. Her heart rate dropped. In that moment, she wasn't thinking about the shot. She was the shot. Every variable, every calculation, every environmental factor existed in perfect clarity in her mind. She pressed the trigger. The rifle fired with massive report that echoed across the mountains. The recoil was substantial, but expected. And then came the waiting. Those interminable seconds, while the bullet traveled nearly 2 miles through air that pushed and buffeted and tried to knock it off course. Reynolds tracked through his spotting scope, watching the target area with intensity that matched Ward's. 8.9 seconds after the shot, the target dropped. Hit! Reynolds breathed. Center mass, confirmed kill. 2,700 meters. Around them, the compound erupted into chaos. But Ward and Reynolds were already breaking down their position, preparing to move before enemy forces could locate them. The shot had been perfect. Now came the hard part, surviving long enough to confirm mission success. The extraction took 18 hours of movement through hostile territory. But when they finally reached the pickup point and the helicopter lifted them away from the mountains, Reynolds looked at Ward with something approaching reverence. I've been teaching snipers for 20 years, he said over the helicopter noise. I thought I understood what was possible. You just rewrote the manual. Ward just nodded, already distant, processing what she'd done with the analytical mind that made her such an effective operator. She'd made a shot that shouldn't exist, proved that human capability combined with technology could achieve what everyone said was impossible. Admiral Keller's report on the operation went through multiple classification levels before landing on desks at the Pentagon. The shot, confirmed at 2,700 meters under combat conditions, became a classified technical achievement that would inform military planning for decades. Ward received a promotion and assignment to a newly created position, Senior Advisor for Long-Range Precision Engagement. She would train the next generation of extreme-distance shooters, developing doctrine and technique for operations that pushed beyond every established limitation. But more importantly, she'd proved something that resonated beyond military circles. She'd demonstrated that excellence exists at levels most people can't comprehend. That capability transcends expectation, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody's paying attention to. The M107 Barrett sat in its case in Ward's new office, cleaned and maintained with the same precision she applied to everything. The rifle had made shots that would be studied and analyzed for years. But more than that, it had proven what Ward had always known. Impossible is just a word people use when they haven't met someone capable of rewriting the definition. Admiral Keller retired 6 months later. At his ceremony, he made a point of publicly recognizing Ward's contributions to naval special warfare. He couldn't discuss the classified operations, couldn't mention the shots that had changed tactical doctrine, but he could acknowledge that excellence existed and that the Navy was better for recognizing it. Ward continued her work quietly, training operators who would carry forward the techniques she'd developed. She never sought publicity or recognition, just continued pursuing perfection in her craft, knowing that somewhere, sometime, another impossible shot would be required. And when that moment came, she'd be ready. Because that's what quiet professionals do. They prepare, they train, they perfect their capabilities in silence. And when the world needs something impossible, they deliver. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the sheep. It just waits for the moment when precision matters more than noise. And then it makes the shot that everyone said couldn't be made. Every single time. Thanks for watching. Every woman has a story worth telling. Join us to hear them all.